HyperSport Industries is a auto reconditioning firm. Essentially, they're a vendor for Carvana, or they were a vendor for Carvana, that does all the cosmetic work on cars that Carvana sells to customers. So when Carvana buys used cars, before it flips them to customers, it has to make sure those cars look good, that they're cleaned out, that any dings and paint scrapes and wheel issues are taken care of. HyperSport, between 2017 and until last year, were the key vendor working in Carvana's facilities, taking care of all of these things. So according to the 8 Carvana employees, most of them former employees who I spoke to, HyperSport, led by Daniel Cerna, were essentially bilking Carvana of money through a variety of means. The primary one was through a duplicate invoice scheme in which HyperSport would charge Carvana multiple times for the same repair, and these invoices were being processed despite internal complaints, according to those former Carvana employees I spoke to. Secondly, HyperSport was basically taking advantage of the fact that Carvana had all of the tools and supplies and paint in-house that was needed for them to repair the cars that they were working on. Because HyperSport shared these reconditioning facilities with Carvana, they had access to all of these supplies that they needed. But according to the employees I spoke to, HyperSport frequently failed to reimburse Carvana for those supplies. We should back up a little bit to give the full story of kind of Carvana's reconditioning history. The company was founded in 2012 as a division within a used car dealership called DriveTime. It was spun off into its own entity in 2014. And between 2014 and 2017, Carvana relied on the reconditioning facilities that DriveTime had. Come 2017, when Carvana goes public, suddenly it's armed with over $200 million in fresh IPO proceeds. So it starts building its own reconditioning facilities. And between 2017 and last year, it built over a dozen across the country. The first one that it opened was in Tolleson, Arizona, a suburb of Phoenix. This facility was operational in September 2017. HyperSport had been incorporated in Arizona 2 months earlier. This facility was the first one to integrate HyperSport into its work line. The Carvana employees I spoke with, many of them really enjoyed their time working at Carvana. This was a high growth company over a number of years. It was a place that empowered people to rise within the organization. That being said, they were disturbed by what they were seeing with HyperSport. And I think they were particularly unsettled that their complaints internally went unaddressed. This was a problem that, according to my sources, went on for a number of years, and that it was systemic in the operations of Carvana's reconditioning facilities. Daniel Cerna did not respond to requests for comment, nor did his brother Jose Garcia Cerna. HyperSport did issue a statement to me in February denying that it had ever defrauded or sought to defraud Carvana, but when I reached out more recently with a more detailed list of the allegations provided, they did not respond to my request for comment. We don't know who ultimately owns HyperSport. We do know that an individual named Jose Alejandro Garcia Cerna was the registered agent for a number of these HyperSport subsidiaries set up in different states. We know through a public records search that this individual appears to have a brother named Daniel Garcia Cerna, who appears to be the same Daniel Cerna identified by the 8 former Carvana employees I spoke to, who was overseeing HyperSport's alleged nefarious activities. When I first reached out to HyperSport's lawyers back in February, raising some of the allegations that I had heard, they denied that any of these individuals were beneficial owners, and that was on the record. So it seems likely that Daniel Cerna is not on paper a beneficial owner, but it does beg the question, who does own HyperSport? Is it his brother, Jose Cerna? Is it other associates who are working with them? That remains unclear. Carvana did not respond to a detailed list of questions that I sent through prior to publication of my article. So I first wrote about Carvana in May of 2022, right at the beginning of the company's sort of downturn. But it was just after that article that I got a call from somebody who identified himself as a painter in one of Carvana's reconditioning facilities. He had a sort of note of alarm in his voice, which caught my attention. He described to me this sort of unbelievable series of allegations involving HyperSport, this vendor, which I had never heard about to that point. And he had identified Daniel Cerna as somebody who had just been let go by Carvana over connection to HyperSport. After that initial call, it sort of set me off and made me want to look into this, but it took a long time to identify who the actual people were who had set up HyperSport, that it was a seeming relative of Daniel's who was involved in setting up these companies, as well as just speaking with a number of other Carvana employees who could verify these allegations made by this individual. Carvana's had a tough time over the last few years. During the early days of the pandemic, they had an incredible boom. Their stock market valuation went through the roof. It was a historically strong used car market, thanks in large part to the near zero interest rate policy set by the Fed, as well as the supply chain issues that were causing there to be fewer new cars for sale. So Carvana really rode that boom. Its controlling shareholder, Ernest Garcia II, the father of the CEO, Ernest Garcia III, during this period he sold $3.6 billion worth of stock. So he really timed his sale of Carvana stock fantastically. More recently, the company has been struggling on a number of fronts. There are a number of short sellers betting against the stock. The company has multiple $billion worth of outstanding debt. In addition to the financial difficulties, Carvana faces a number of legal problems. The Garcias are both being sued personally for a stock sale that they arranged for themselves in 2020. The company is being sued for alleged failures to give customers titles to their vehicles, among a number of other lawsuits.